This video is going to be for a deep dive on the exchange contract that is used in the Defiantly platform. So once you access the dApp, you can connect to our exchange where you can buy or you can sell DeFi tokens. There is a previous video which I'll link in the description that talks about how to interact with this exchange. And you also can take a look at our documentation on our Gitbook. You go over in the Gitbook and you select exchange. It walks you through step by step how to interact with that contract. But today we're going to be taking a look at the code behind to better understand what's happening when you buy and you sell on this platform. So as with all of our functionality, we have a contract button in the upper right hand corner. If you click on that, that'll open up a BSC scan where you can take a look at the code and all of the history of what's happened with that contract. So if you look on this page, you can see that there are 190 BUSD currently in the exchange contract. So again, as I mentioned before, that's what correlates to the stablecoin value here. You can see a list of all the transactions that have happened. So for example, when the contract was created, in these two cases, we're setting addresses and distributions, which I'll speak about in a little bit. And then somebody also ran a buy transaction. If you click on the transaction detail here, you can find that they bought 85 DeFi for about 100 BUSD. So that kind of gives you an idea of what's happened there. In addition to knowing the history of what's happened, you can also view the contract tab. So the contract tab shows any of the code. So the Solidity files, and Solidity is the programming language and framework that's used to create smart contracts, at least in Ethereum or EVM compatible blockchains. And so these are all the code files that we'll take a look at. I'm not going to look at them in this interface. I'm going to use an IDE, an application development environment that makes it just easier to read with color coding and things like that. So without further ado, let's take a look at the code. Okay. So there are a number of functions that this code can do. Looking at our site, the primary functions you might imagine are buy and sell. But there are a couple of admin functionalities and properties that you should be aware of as you go through it. I'm going to get to those in a moment, but let's just talk about overall what you should look for in contracts and what things are important and why. So here's the starting point. We're defining this contract's name as an exchange. And there are a couple of classes that it inherits from. So this is code that it pulls in automatically, and it allows this contract, the exchange, to use that code automatically. So first thing you notice is it's ownable. That means an account can own that specific contract. It can do certain admin functionality, which we'll talk about a little bit further on. But by and large, what it's doing is it's setting a address whenever you interact with it. And so this is one of the child kind of contracts, or the things it inherited from. And you'll see there's an owner property, and that's an address. That's important as we kind of get into some more details later. It's pausable. So a couple of functions here you'll notice will be paused or unpaused. So say if we need to stop withdrawals or stop exchanges, we can do that in this. One important thing to note about the platform is that we will never perform those actions without community approval. And I like to bake in some of these admin functions right into our dApp so that ultimately the owner is removed and the users can make those decisions when necessary. And then finally, there's a re-entrancy guard. This just kind of prevents the same function from being called multiple times. So up here, you'll notice this is code that runs when the contract is first initialized or when it's first kind of deployed out for the first time. And all we do is we're initializing the owner. So in this case, if we kind of go down the line, so to speak, we transfer ownership to the person creating the contract. So this is, again, one-time code that runs and it sets that one variable to being the owner of the contract. Next up in admin functionality, you notice there are some properties that are apparent on this contract. So distribution info, tax info, and addresses. Those are three kind of main functionalities. These are informational purposes up here. So seeing the distribution, seeing the tax, seeing the address info, but any of the changes like setting the distribution, setting the addresses, will be only done by the owner. So this only owner function, basically what it does is it tries to check and it sees that if the person making the call over here, it checks if they're the owner. So if the owner, which is that property we set when the contract first was created, is not equal to the sender, this is requiring this condition to be true, then it'll throw this error message and it won't let it continue. Right? That's very important. So a regular user can't go and change the distributions. Only the person who created this contract can do so. Okay? All right. So what are these properties? Well, we have three here. We have a treasury distribution, an exchange distribution, and a distribution denominator. So the first two are important for taxes, right? As I mentioned here in a previous video, there's a 15% buy tax. So 10% of that tax goes to the treasury, which we see here. 5% goes back to the exchange to everybody in that pool, and the remaining percentage goes to the person who deposited the funds. These three values can be changed. If they do get changed, you'll notice a couple things. One is the tax value will get updated here. And then two, I'll show you how to check within the contract. But this is another important point for our platform. I want to set it up so that within this dApp, whenever things like distributions and addresses change, users get notified. We can set it up in Discord so the Discord gets alerted, or we can set it up within the app itself. But it's very important for transparency to know when things change. So let's take a look at how you can check that yourself, just to verify. One thing that's important in DeFi is to be able to do your own research and not just rely upon what somebody else says the code does. So if you're on this contract screen, again, you can get to that by clicking this button. You can actually interact with the contract directly in your browser here. So if I click read as proxy, I click on, say, distribution info, and I hit query. This is going to query those values and tell me at any given time what those are equal to. And now we're using integer math in this with 18 decimals. So this information looks like it's a relatively large number, but it actually has like 18 decimal places. So we put the decimal there. It's showing 10% is going to treasury, and then 5% to the exchange. So that's a way you can spot check to see if these values have changed or something looks right or incorrect. And I encourage you to do so before you make any interaction with the contract. But that's one of the properties there. The other is just a distribution denominator. We'll talk about that later. It's 100. It's basically saying 10 divided by 100 to get to 10% because we are using integer math here. And so whenever we set the distributions, that is pretty straightforward. We pass in that information. We send in those three values. Sell tax right now is hard coded to 0. It's not ever implemented. And then buy tax is just a combination of those two. This buy tax ends up being what is fed to this screen over here for this buy tax. So it's very important to note that is set there. That's the very first step in this admin functionality. The second are setting addresses. So there's a couple of addresses the contract has to keep track of. One is the treasury. The other is the project token. So this would be the DeFi, DEFY token. And then the stable token. Stable token is the BUSD token. It uses them throughout the application. Same thing here, only the owner can modify this. And it just sets those values. And same thing as before, you can go into the contract, you can get the address info, and you can query it. And this returns the contracts. So I can actually look at this. I can say, what is the treasury? Where are we keeping our funds? You can see here, it's calling to this contract, and it's a Gnosis safe. Similarly here, you can see how much money and how much funds are in the treasury. So right now we have 10 BUSD and 0.5 DeFi. But the important thing to note is this is not going to a user wallet. It's going to a Gnosis safe. So if we go over to here, this is a platform that allows us to do things like multi-signature, right? Um, and so this will be set up so that if we want to move funds from the treasury, at least two or more people have to sign this transaction. And as the platform gets bigger and bigger, we'll change that number to be larger, potentially even controlling it within the dApp itself. Right now, it's relatively small because there are relatively few admins as we build up the community. But that's one thing that we're looking at. The project token, so if we click on this, this will go to the DeFi token. See it right here. This is our token. You can see some of the transactions that individuals made. And then finally, the stable token, which in our case is BUSD. So that's what it's using there. It's just using those for informational purposes. And then the final two admin functions are pause and unpause. So pause, if you look at kind of jumping ahead, you can buy when it's not paused. So if you go to when not paused here, so let me go to that contract. It basically requires that the contract's not paused. And this is just setting a simple variable, which is this paused variable. And it basically requires it either be paused or not paused, depending on what your code is doing. So this is just saying for the buy, make sure it's not paused. So you can run pause or unpause within the app. Again, that's that information can also be viewed here. So right now it's saying false, it's not paused. That tax info that I mentioned earlier as well can be shown here. So 15% tax, and if it's paused or not paused, as well as the owner. So you can see the owner contract address here, the wallet for that one. So super handy interface to query and read the contract for any of those admin functions. Next up, we will take a look at some of the user functions. All right, when you interact with the contract, you will generally either be buying or you'll be selling. Okay. These things can only happen when it's not paused, and non-reentrant again just says you can't call this twice. And a lot of these contracts, you can see like this is using the Open Zeppelin framework. This is a standard framework that the community uses. It's open source code that can be interacted with. Okay, so let's dig into the details of what happens when you click buy. So starting in the application, if you click buy, you hit a certain amount. You have to approve that amount first. After you approve, you can click swap, and then that will buy 100 BUSD worth of these tokens, which at this moment in time is 82 DeFi. So the value that's passed in here is the stable fund amount. So 100 BUSD in this case. So you pass that in, it grabs the stable token and the project token. So it needs to know the stable token to see that, hey, does this user have that balance for that token? And it grabs the project token so it can do some exchanges between those values. We hold up a container of all the information for this transaction just for ease of tracking. We show the amount bought in that stable fund, the stable token, the treasury distribution, which is the amount bought times the treasury distribution, which was that 10%, so 10, divided by the distribution denominator, which is 100, right? So that's 10 divided by 100 is 10% times the amount bought, and that gets how much goes to the treasury. Same thing for the exchange, except we're passing in that 5%. Then the funds received to the user, this is the DeFi token value. So we call this function, which we'll look at in a moment, that'll convert the amount that they're, the BUSD that they're entering to a token, a DeFi amount. And that amount is basically the amount that they passed in at 100 BUSD minus the treasury distribution minus the exchange distribution, because those are going off to those wallets accordingly. So converts that, sets the user, the person that sent the request is the user. We do some checking. We say, the minimum buy has to be one BUSD. So if you go over here, for example, and I try to do 0.5, it's going to say there's a minimum value here, and this is going to prevent you anyway. But in case for some reason that gets through, the contract protects from it as well. Then we transfer from the sender to this exchange the amount that they bought. So the full 100 BUSD in this case. Then we transfer transfer to the treasury how much distribution they get. And then we mint tokens to the sender for the funds received, that converted amount. Once that's done, we emit an event that's the token worth updated, which I'll talk about later. And then we'll also emit an event that says this thing was bought, which it has all the details about what happened when it was bought. So if I go, for example, over here, and I look at the transactions and I see something was bought, I can actually find out all of the details about kind of what information was sent in here. And I can look at the logs and I can see what was transferred, what was approved, and the token worth that was updated and things like that. So you can get the full history here. We'll probably do another deep dive or a technical education session about how to read this information if you're ever curious about that feature. But these are just emitting events that get written to the blockchain, so you can find out what happened within the transaction. And you can see that's over here as well. So the token worth was updated. Here's a topic. So this is either that it was bought, I think in that case, and then the token worth was updated again later. So again, you can view a full history of the events within this contract. But that's it for the buy. It's relatively straightforward. Before we go into the sell, I want to talk about what happens when the stable token conversion happens. So basically the amount here is the amount less any taxes. So we go here. And how do we figure out the token worth, right? So the token worth here is 1 DeFi equals 1.0298 BUSD. So we're just doing that simple math. We're basically saying take their amount and divide it by how much it's worth. Well, how do we figure out the token worth at 1.02? That's basically saying how much stable token do we have, which we know again from the community dashboard that we have 190 stable token. How many total supply of tokens do we have? Again, from the dashboard, we know it's 184.5. And then we basically just take the balance divided by the supply. So if I open up my calculator here, 190 divided by 184.5 equals 1.0298. So that's how we get the token worth amount. And if we go back to the conversion for the stable 2 token, so we're going from BUSD to DEFY, we're passing 100 divided by the worth. So in this case, you take 100 divided by 1.0298, and then roughly you have 97 there. So that's the overall tokens, but remember there's a tax at 15%. So it's really 1 times 0.85. So taking out the 50%, divided by 1.0298, which is the worth, and we get about 82. If we go to the exchange, we'll do 100, we've got about 82 there. So that's how it does that calculation between the two. And then one thing that I mentioned is a token worth updated gets sent out. So if I go to this detail, it basically emits this event where it just says what the new worth is. The reason being is we can just see whenever the token gets updated in the events here. We'll see kind of the details about it. So it's 1.0298, and that's what it's saying. The worth got updated here. So pretty straightforward to find out, whenever the token gets updated. And then again, that'll be reflected in this dashboard. So in summary, what happens when you buy? Basically, we calculate the tax, we convert the amount less the tax to the tokens. We make sure that the amount is above 1 BUSD. We transfer the full amount that they entered, say 100 BUSD, to this contract. Then we send some of it to the treasury, and then we mint how many ever tokens that they received. Then after doing so, then the user will see a balance within their own tokens and then their account value in BUSD. So basically tokens times, this DeFi price. And then this price history will update accordingly from there. That's what happens when you buy. Next up, we'll take a look at what happens when you sell. All right, just like buying, selling is relatively straightforward. Not a lot going on in this contract. You sell an amount. So going back to the UI, when somebody clicks on sell, say I want to sell 100 DeFi, I'm going to get 102 BSD back. I would approve and swap that, but there's a 100 DeFi is what gets passed into here. Once again, this only can be run when it's not paused. We grab the tokens that we're going to interact with, the contracts for stable and project. We set the amount sold as directly the amount that they passed in. We do the conversion in the reverse direction. So if I take a look at this, basically get the token worth. I take the amount of DeFi times the worth, and that's how much new tokens, this is BUSD, they get back. And that's how much funds received. The user we set, just for informational purposes, they have to sell at least 0.000001 DeFi. So this is the minimum amount that they can hold. We transfer from the sender to this address to the exchange the amount they sold of DeFi. So we're taking the DeFi from their wallet, putting it into ours, and then we burn that DeFi amount. So that's out of circulation at this point. And then we transfer to that sender the funds they receive. And then we emit an event, just like in the buy, with all this sell info of what happened. Again, for full transparency. So straightforward on the sell contract. I don't think we have any sale events so far, but if we did, we would see it in this list in the history or in the transactions, you'd see it as well. The transaction is kind of clicking sell on the exchange, and then the event is when we emit an event within that contract. So aside from that, those are the kind of major functionalities of this contract. So in summary, we set an owner when this contract is created. We set some distribution infos, so some taxes. We set some addresses, so how we send funds to Treasury, how we interact with our DeFi token and then BUSD. We give the admin functionality to pause and unpause. You can buy a token, you can sell a token. And then we have some conversions between stable to DeFi or DeFi to stable in the reverse direction. And then we have some events whenever token worth gets updated. Okay, the final thing that I want to talk about with this contract is what are the risks, right? So with everything, there are risks. So don't just assume something's going to be stable, something's going to be safe. You want to be aware of where are the weak spots, where are things that can break. Okay. So one thing is this contract is upgradable. There's a lot of debate in the DeFi and the general crypto community about if the contract can be upgradable or not, if it can be immutable, for example. We decided at DeFi to make this upgradable so we can make tweaks and modifications in the future if we need to. So if we want to add more functionality to the exchange, for example, accepting USDC as a stable token or things like that, or maybe we want to remove the pausable functionality because the community doesn't like it. So as a result, we're making it upgradable. Again, you can be aware and kind of receive notifications whenever these things change, and we'll integrate that with our Discord server. But just be kind of aware that that's one potential weak point. Somebody can upgrade this maliciously if somehow they gain access to code. Right now, only the owner can do that, but that's just something to kind of watch out for. Um, so we protect that in a number of ways. One are going to be alerts. The community will be aware of whatever anything changes, and the second will be code reviews. So whenever we make a change to this contract, we're going to review it with the community, and also there'll be community members that can go in there and deep dive in the code. Other developers that are aware of kind of what's going on. So those are the two ways we hope to mitigate that risk. Then if the community really feels compelled, we can remove the upgradable kind of functionality, make it set in stone. You can never modify it. It's not an option. Um, Risk number two is that it is ownable, right? So the owner can make a number of these changes, right? They can change the distributions, they can change the addresses. So those are things you want to watch out for. How you mitigate against that, again, is just getting alerts or going into the contract and checking this information regularly. What I would suggest doing is before you interact with the contract, just double check. What does the distribution look like? Is it really what they say it is? Um, did their code change? Has anything been modified? That's kind of one way to mitigate that risk. Um, right now, there is a single owner of this contract. We want to change that as the community grows, and that's something we can easily implement as we get more members. Um, the other thing, which is a positive, is our treasury is in a safe, which has multi signatures. So multiple people have to sign this before things can move. So somebody can't just liquidate the treasury without having some other member be aware of it. The number is relatively low right now of how we have approvers, so to speak, of this. But as again, the community goes and increases in size, will help mitigate some of those things. And then the final thing I would say with this thing that poses a risk is that if somebody does hack it, we eventually want to get to insurance. So insurance to protect if BUSD depegs, that will be a catastrophic type event, or if somebody drains our wallets, we want to look into insurance. But that's something I want to put as a vote to the community. So again, just in summary, risks are: it is upgradable, it has a single owner at the moment. Multi-signature needs to be expanded to more users. There is a single wallet for the treasury. And as with anything, it can get hacked potentially. So we'll have to watch out for those things and make sure we are using all the regular secure precautionary measurements, such as audits, such as security scans, and things like that. I bring these risks, to the community. Just let them know that we should be aware of these things. Nothing is perfect. We want to make sure we're aware and have a plan for anything that may happen. So those are the risks. If you can think of anything else, throw in the comments. I'm happy to discuss further. But that's what we see for this updated. And that's it. That's our contract. So again, fully visible within the contract tab, and you can interact with it. Go and read as proxy. You can even find out, conversion amounts here if you're so curious to go within the app. But that's it. If you have any questions on this functionality, feel free to drop into our Discord. The community will be happy to help out with those questions. You can also just look into our docs, both in our exchange as well as maybe some of the tokenomics. We go through the exact calculations of how things work and what it looks like if people buy and sell. So that'll be super useful. And as always, we're happy to help out in any way if you have any questions. Thanks for watching, guys.